did you have no other choice but to crash out? I visited my mom at her specialized care home for the first time and immediately realized they were doing something to her. My dementia-stricken mother was in a wheelchair she didn't need, wearing a food-stained gown that smelled like urine, her red emergency button unplugged. She backed away thinking I was a nurse when she saw me. I looked at her whiteboard and saw the last cleaned section was time-stamped 4 days ago. I found the first nurse I could, some woman named Sandra, who was scrolling through her phone at the nurse's station. Excuse me, why hasn't my mother been bathed in 4 days? She glanced up just enough to respond. She had a rough night earlier this week, hasn't let us come near her since. You know how dementia is. Something about her reply went rehearsed, so I went back to where mom was and started examining. I found her medication log that showed gaps spanning days at a time. I went to the front desk and took her visitor log, where I found notes about her incidents, like missed meals or fainting, each one being attributed to a rough night. The pattern was obvious. I found the head nurse, Linda, doing paperwork in the break room. Why is my mother's care documentation showing neglect? She looked at me like I'd insulted her. Those are just paperwork requirements. We focus on actual care here, not filling out forms all day. Maybe if families visited more often, you'd understand how hard this job is. I'm visiting now, and I'm seeing neglect. We're not miracle workers. We try our best. The documentation doesn't reflect the effort we put in. I remember rage consumed my body, and I realized if they wanted to play it that way, I'd document everything myself. I signed myself out at the visitor log to make it look like I was leaving, but proceeded to actually stay for the entire day. I was careful not to let the nurses I'd spoken to see me. That's when I saw it all. At lunch, they brought mom a tray with a panini roll with moldy bread. The plastic bottle of water was squished and had an odor coming from it. Around 3 p.m., I watched them give mom and 3 other residents their afternoon medications. The nurse who gave them looked around almost as if making sure nobody was watching, then went into mom's closet and started rummaging through. She stayed for about a minute before putting everything back and leaving. When she turned the corner, I rushed in to check. My mom was drooling and barely responsive, and when I went through her closet myself, I noticed her valuable belongings box had been slightly moved. I checked it, and that's when I saw her wedding ring was gone. The one dad gave her 52 years ago. I was fuming. I marched straight to the nurse that did this. Where's her ring? I demanded, but she also had a rehearsed response. We file reports, but things go missing with 40 residents. You should have left it at home. We're not responsible for valuables. It was at that exact moment I realized why all the cameras in the rooms pointed away from the closets. I decided I was done being nice. I scheduled an emergency meeting with the facility director for the next morning. I brought every bit of proof I had, but Mr. Waters, the director, leaned back in his leather chair and sighed like I was wasting his time. I'm sorry to hear that, but these people with dementia don't even know what year it is. Are you sure your mom didn't just give that ring away and forget? I sat there baffled, watching him explain everything away. The state allows a certain margin for food expiration dates. The medications are within legal dosing. The policy on our website. He was smiling that corporate smile the whole time, like he was robbing us blind and knew we couldn't do anything about it. Then he dropped the bomb. Besides, your mother signed a comfort care waiver when she was admitted. My eyes damn near exploded. She has dementia. She couldn't consent to that. She was lucid enough to sign. That's when I crashed out. I pulled out my phone right there in his office, maintaining eye contact the entire time. Hi, Adult Protective Services. I need to report systematic abuse and financial exploitation right here at Serenity Gardens Memory Care. Mr. Waters' face went white in a second. Now wait a minute. Let's not be hasty. I have video evidence of expired food being served, theft of personal belongings, and documentation of heavy sedatives being used for staff convenience. I could see him across the table from me, now sweating and basically pleading for this life. Please hang up. We can work this out internally. I had no idea this was happening. Other families in the waiting room started listening. One woman stood up. Did you mention things being stolen? My father's watch went missing last month. Mr. Waters was beyond scrambling, trying to put out 10 different fires at once. I'll refund everything. We'll fire those staff members immediately. Please. I stayed on the phone. Yes, I'll hold for the emergency intervention team. Mr. Waters was now trying to close his office door as other families approached. What do you want? Free care? A full refund? Please, this will destroy us. Sweat was literally dripping from his forehead as the officer's voice came through the speaker, loud and clear. Ma'am, we're dispatching a team now. Do not leave the facility. State investigators are en route. Mr. Waters reached for my phone, desperate. I yanked my phone back so fast he almost fell forward across his desk, and that's when the APS officer's voice came through the speaker, asking if I was safe and if anyone was threatening me. The families crowding the doorway heard every word and started pushing closer, their faces changing from confused to angry as they realized this wasn't just about my mom's stolen ring. Mr. Waters stumbled backward, his hands shaking as he knocked over his coffee mug, brown liquid spreading across his papers while he stared at me like I'd just destroyed his whole life. The officer told me to stay where I was and document everything I could see while investigators drove to the facility, so I switched to video mode and started recording Mr. Waters as he grabbed his desk phone with trembling fingers. His voice cracked when he told whoever answered that they had a situation and needed to call corporate immediately, while behind me more families pushed into his office, demanding to know about their own missing items and why their loved ones were being drugged. Sandra appeared in the doorway looking like she might throw up when she saw me still on the phone with APS, and she started whispering something urgent to Mr. Waters about the medication room, but I caught it all on my recording. The woman whose father's watch went missing started listing other things that had disappeared, including his wallet, his wedding band, and a gold chain her mother had given him before she died. 20 minutes crawled by with Mr. Waters trying to calm the growing crowd while making frantic calls to corporate lawyers and board members, his shirt soaking through with sweat as he kept glancing at me recording everything. I watched him lean over his computer and start clicking through files, deleting things left and right, not realizing I could see his screen perfectly reflected in the window behind him, where folder after folder disappeared into the trash. The APS officer stayed on the line the whole time, asking me to describe what I was seeing, taking notes as I told her about the files being deleted and the way Sandra kept running between rooms looking more panicked every time she passed. 2 state vehicles finally pulled into the parking lot, and I watched through the window as Eloise Dowd from APS walked in with a team of people carrying clipboards and cameras, her voice cutting through the chaos when she announced that nobody was allowed to leave and all records were now under state custody. Mr. Waters tried to speak, but she held up her hand and told him lawyers could talk later. Right now, this was an active investigation, and he he needed to step away from his computer immediately. Eloise took me to a private room while her team spread through the facility like ants, and I handed over my phone with all the videos and photos I'd taken, watching as she started a formal chain of custody document with every file numbered and described. She asked me detailed questions about the timeline, when I first noticed problems, what specific staff members had said, making me sign multiple forms and initial every page while her recorder captured everything. Through the window, I could see staff members being pulled aside for interviews one by one, and Sandra was crying at the nurse's station with mascara running down her face as an investigator took notes. Linda arrived for her shift and froze in the doorway when she saw the investigators, then tried to turn around and leave but got stopped by a state officer who guided her to another interview room. The whole facility felt different now, like someone had finally turned on all the lights and everybody could see the dirt and neglect that had been hidden in the shadows for who knows how long. Georgina Duff showed up within an hour wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase, immediately trying to tell investigators they couldn't access certain areas without proper warrants. But Eloise didn't even look up from her notes. She just slid a paper across the table showing her legal authority under state elder abuse statutes, and I watched Georgina's face tighten as she read it and realized she had no power here. They finally let me see Mom while the investigation continued, and I found an aide actually cleaning her properly for the first time, using real soap and warm water instead of just wet wipes. The aide whispered that she was sorry, that she'd tried to report things before but got written up for insubordination, and threatened with termination if she kept complaining about the care standards. The timing of that nurse checking the closet right after giving medications seems way too convenient for a random theft attempt. Makes me wonder if this is some kind of organized operation where they sedate residents first, then take their stuff while they're too drowsy to notice or remember anything. Mom seemed less drugged than before, her eyes actually focusing on my face instead of staring through me, and when I held her hand, she squeezed back like she recognized me. Eloise's team ordered immediate corrections throughout the facility, reconnecting Mom's emergency button that had been unplugged for who knows how long, replacing her contaminated meal with fresh food from outside, documenting every single violation with photographs and measurements. I heard one investigator tell another this was the worst case they'd seen all year, taking pictures of the moldy food in the kitchen, the expired medications in the med room, the filthy conditions in multiple resident rooms. Mr. Waters stood in the hallway with his shirt completely soaked through, watching his whole operation fall apart as investigators sealed boxes of records and carried them out to their vehicles. That same afternoon, a doctor named Eloise Dowd from the state team pulled me aside to review Mom's medication chart. She spread out 3 months of records on the table and started marking doses with a red pen. Her face got more worried with each page she turned. She showed me how Mom had been getting 3 times the normal amount of sedatives every single day. The doses were so high that Mom could barely stay awake most days. Eloise called in the head nurse and told her to cut the medications immediately. She warned that Mom might get upset or confused as the drugs left her system. I sat next to Mom's bed for the rest of the day holding her hand. Around 4 o'clock, her eyes started to focus better and she squeezed my fingers back. She looked at me and whispered my name for the first time in weeks. While I was sitting there, a young aide named Darla Edmonds kept walking past the door looking nervous. When the investigators went to check another room, she came in and closed the door behind her. She told me there was a whole system for stealing from residents, and she couldn't take it anymore. She said certain staff members would mark which residents had valuable items, and then those things would disappear. She had been keeping copies of the work schedules for months because she noticed the pattern. Every time certain people worked together, stuff went missing. She wrote her phone number on a napkin and pushed it into my hand. She said to have my lawyer call her because she had proof of everything. The next visitor was Detective Zaire Driscoll, who showed up with a notebook and a serious look on his face. He sat down across from me and asked for every detail about Mom's ring. I told him it was a gold band with 3 small diamonds that Dad bought in 1972. He wrote down that I last saw it 2 weeks ago when I helped Mom wash her hands. He asked if I had any photos of it, and I showed him one from Mom's birthday last year. He said they would check every pawn shop in a 50-mile radius and search online marketplaces too. He gave me his card and said to call if I remembered anything else about the theft. The next morning, I came back early to find more investigators going through filing cabinets in the med room. One of them showed me a medication log with entries that made no sense at all. There was one entry showing pills given at 3 in the afternoon, but the log wasn't filled out until 11 at night. Another entry had different handwriting halfway through the same sentence. They put yellow evidence stickers on dozens of pages and sealed them in plastic bags. One investigator told me this was criminal falsification of medical records. Later that morning, I overheard 2 investigators talking about the phrase rough night that kept appearing in the notes. They had figured out it was code for when staff gave residents extra drugs to keep them quiet. Every single time a family member made a complaint, their loved one would have a rough night within 2 or 3 days. The pattern went back at least 6 months in every file they checked. I felt sick thinking about all the times they must have drugged Mom just to make their jobs easier. I called the state ombudsman office and got connected to a man named Alonzo Eden. He said he had been getting complaints about this place for 2 years, but never had enough proof to investigate. Now, with everything I had documented, he could finally do something about it. He promised to show up next week without warning to do a full inspection. He said they would check everything from staffing levels to food quality to medication practices. 2 days later, while I was helping Mom eat lunch, a woman named Georgina Duff knocked on the door. She said she was from the corporate office and wanted to talk privately. We went into the hallway and she pulled out a folder full of papers. She offered me a complete refund of everything we had paid plus $50,000 extra if I would sign an NDA. She kept saying that lawsuits take years, and Mom needed care right now, not courtroom battles later. She pushed the pen toward me and said this offer was only good for 24 hours. I told her I needed to think about it and talk to my family first. Her smile disappeared and she said I was making a mistake by not taking the money. The next day, I got a certified letter saying the facility wanted to discharge Mom for safety reasons. They claimed our family was being disruptive and creating a hostile work environment for staff. I called a lawyer named Atticus Egan who specialized in elder law and read him the letter. He laughed and said this was obvious retaliation that no judge would allow. He sent them a letter that same afternoon threatening to sue for illegal retaliation and discrimination. The discharge threat disappeared, but now none of the staff would look me in the eye. I decided to stay overnight to see what really happened during the night shift. I told the evening nurse I was staying and she just shrugged and walked away. By midnight, I understood why families never never knew how bad things were. There were only 2 aides for 40 residents, and call lights stayed on for over an hour. I watched residents crying for help while staff sat at the desk playing on their phones. One man had soiled himself and nobody changed him for 2 hours. I wrote down every single thing with exact times in my notebook. The next morning, other families started approaching me in the parking lot. They had heard about the investigation and wanted to share their own stories. One man said his father had lost 3 expensive watches in 2 months. A woman said her mother's pearl necklace disappeared the day after she wore it to dinner. We compared dates and found that items always went missing when the same group of staff members worked together. Everyone had been told the same thing about dementia patients losing things. We all felt stupid for believing it for so long. That's when my phone rang and Detective Zair's name showed up on the screen. He told me they'd been checking local pawn shops and found a bunch of stuff from the facility, including jewelry and watches that matched what families had described. The dates on the pawn tickets lined up perfectly with the staff schedules he'd been tracking. He said the security footage from one shop showed 3 employees he was trying to identify right now, and he needed families to come look at the items to confirm what belonged to their relatives. I wrote down the address and told the other families what he'd said. Everyone started pulling out their phones to look for old photos of the missing items. While we were doing that, Atticus called me back about the comfort care waiver Mom had supposedly signed. He explained that since Mom had dementia when she signed it, she couldn't legally consent to anything, which meant the waiver was probably worthless. He'd already filed formal complaints with 3 different state agencies about it, and he said the facility's insurance company would be very interested to know about all this fraud and neglect. Corporate was about to have way bigger problems than just our complaint, he promised. The next morning when I got to the facility, the APS team was already there setting up new rules. They ordered a complete change in how the staff had to do their paperwork, requiring them to enter everything in real time with a supervisor checking it. The nurses were complaining loudly that it was too much work to do while taking care of residents. Eloise, the APS supervisor, told them straight up that they could either follow the new rules or lose their licenses. I watched as 4 nurses walked out right then, instead of agreeing to the new system. 2 days later, I got a call from Atticus warning me that Linda had filed an incident report claiming I'd threatened her and created an unsafe work environment. It was obvious payback for everything that was happening, but Atticus said I needed to be really careful now about every interaction with the staff. He told me to write down everything that happened from now on, including the time and who was there. I started carrying a small notebook everywhere and making notes after every conversation. Meanwhile, I went to the county office and filed public records requests for all the state inspection reports from the past 5 years. When the documents came back a week later, they showed the same problems coming up over and over. Every violation had been covered up with something called a corrective action plan that never actually got done. The place had been failing inspections for years but somehow stayed open. I made copies of everything and gave them to Atticus and the APS team. Then things got really interesting when Alonzo Eden showed up with his survey team at 6 in the morning without warning. They caught the morning medication pass in action and found expired pills, medications stored wrong, and nurses who had poured out pills hours before they were supposed to give them. One of the surveyors pulled me aside and said just what they'd found that morning could be enough to shut the whole place down. Why does this Georgina Duff person show up with exactly $50,000 and a ready-made NDA right when everything's falling apart? The timing feels calculated, like they had this damage control plan sitting in a drawer somewhere waiting for when someone finally caught them. The survey team spent the rest of the day examining everything, including the security cameras. They confirmed what we'd suspected, that the cameras were deliberately pointed away from closets and anywhere valuables were kept. They also found that several cameras hadn't worked in months, but nobody had fixed them or even reported it. The surveyors wrote it all down as evidence that the facility was intentionally making it easy for theft to happen. A few days later, corporate sent someone they called a family relations specialist to try to smooth everything over. She showed up with a big smile and a folder full of papers about their renewed commitment to excellence and promises about culture change that didn't actually mean anything specific. She kept using words like journey and partnership without ever saying what they'd actually do different. The other families weren't buying any of it, and one man actually laughed when she talked about their dedication to transparency. Detective Zaire called me again the next week to say he'd found Mom's ring at a pawn shop downtown. The problem was the inscription inside was worn down and hard to read clearly. I brought him old photos that showed the ring and the inscription, but Mom couldn't confirm it was hers because of her dementia. Without her testimony, the detective said the legal case would be harder to prove in court. We'd have to rely on the photos and hope a judge would believe us. Around the same time, the doctor started reducing Mom's sedatives like he'd promised. As soon as they lowered the dose, she started having bad sundowning in the evenings, getting confused and upset when the sun went down. The staff kept saying this proved she needed the heavy medications, but the doctor explained it was just withdrawal and would get better after a few weeks. I started staying late every night to sit with her through the worst of it, holding her hand while she cried and asked for Dad, not understanding where she was or why she felt so bad. 3 days after another rough night with Mom, Atticus called me into his office downtown and spread out a stack of papers across his desk. He pointed to different sections while explaining how civil lawsuits against nursing homes work, showing me case examples where families spent years in court and ended up with nothing because the facilities had better lawyers. The retainer alone would be $15,000 just to start, and he kept shaking his head when I asked about contingency lawyers taking these cases. He pulled up his computer and showed me how these corporate chains budget millions for legal defense every year, way more than they spend on actual patient care. My bank account was already down to almost nothing from taking unpaid leave from work to deal with all this. I sat there looking at the numbers he wrote down, doing the math in my head, knowing I couldn't afford any of it. Meanwhile, back at the facility, things were getting worse because APS had required them to hire more staff as part of their safety plan, but nobody wanted to work there anymore. I watched the regular nurses refusing to pick up extra shifts, and the temp agencies wouldn't send anyone to a place under state investigation. The few staff members who did show up were rushing through everything, skipping basic stuff like helping residents to the bathroom on time or checking if they'd eaten their meals. I saw one aide trying to feed 6 people at once during lunch, just leaving trays in front of confused residents who couldn't feed themselves. Mom's roommate sat there for 40 minutes with her soup getting cold because nobody had time to help her. The medication cart sat unattended in the hallway, while the nurse ran to deal with someone falling in another room. That evening, Darla texted me to meet her at the coffee shop down the street after her shift, saying she couldn't talk at work anymore. She showed up looking exhausted, still in her scrubs, and started telling me how it really was working there before everything blew up. She said they had one aide for every 15 residents on good days, sometimes 20 when people called in sick, and half those residents needed help with everything from eating to going to the bathroom. She talked about getting paid $12 an hour to deal with residents who hit and scratched them during care, about how she hadn't had a real lunch break in months. She kept looking over her shoulder while explaining how some staff justified taking things by saying the families were rich and wouldn't miss it, or that they deserved it for all the abuse they took. She said she was already applying to other jobs but couldn't quit without another offer because she had kids to feed, and if they found out she was talking to me, they'd fire her immediately and contest her unemployment. 2 days later, Mr. Waters called me himself, his voice all smooth and friendly like we were old pals. He said he'd been reviewing Mom's account and noticed some billing errors that he wanted to fix, offering to refund 3 months of charges if I'd consider dropping the APS complaint. He kept saying he was just a businessman trying to provide a service, that he'd trusted his staff too much and had no idea about any problems until I brought them up. He even offered to personally ensure Mom got better care going forward, whatever that meant. I needed that money bad. My credit cards were maxed out and rent was due, but something about his tone made my skin crawl. The next afternoon, I was visiting Mom when I saw something that made me stop in the doorway. A young aide I'd never seen before was carefully braiding Mom's hair, humming some old song I recognized from Mom's era while she worked. Mom was actually smiling, relaxed for the first time in weeks, reaching up to touch the aide's hand. The aide chatted with her about her pretty hair, asked her about her favorite colors, treated her like an actual person instead of just another task to complete. It hit me hard, seeing that kindness, knowing that not everyone there was bad, but also knowing one good aide couldn't fix a broken system. I spent the next week calling and visiting other memory care places, but every single one had the same story. 6-month waiting list minimum, some were over a year, and they wanted deposits of $5,000 or more just to get on the list. The nice facilities, the ones with good ratings and no violations, wouldn't even consider taking someone who was currently at a facility under investigation. The directors all gave me the same worried look when I mentioned Serenity Gardens, like Mom had some contagious disease. One place straight up told me they couldn't risk their reputation by accepting transfers from problem facilities. Then Mom got sick, really sick, and everything else stopped mattering. The night nurse called me at 2 in the morning saying Mom had a fever of 103 and was confused, more than usual, pulling at her clothes and crying. The ambulance took forever to arrive, and when they finally loaded her up, she was barely responsive. At the ER, she kept pulling at her IV lines, not understanding why she was there, fighting the nurses who tried to help her. The doctor came out after running tests, his face serious, telling me she had a severe UTI that had probably been developing for days without anyone noticing. He asked point blank if I wanted him to file a neglect report, said the dehydration levels he was seeing were criminal. The next morning, they ran more blood work and found something that made the doctor actually angry. Mom's blood still showed high levels of benzos, way higher than what she should have had if they'd really been reducing her dose like they claimed. The hospital social worker didn't even ask my permission before calling APS to add this to the investigation, saying it was mandatory reporting when they found evidence of chemical restraint. Mom stayed in the hospital for 3 days, and every nurse who came in commented on how dehydrated and malnourished she was. While Mom was still in the hospital, Serenity Gardens had the nerve to send me a bill for additional services during the investigation period. They were charging for things like special positioning to prevent bed sores, extra hygiene care, enhanced supervision, all stuff that should have been basic care in the first place. I called Atticus right away and he said it was definitely illegal retaliation, but fighting it meant opening another legal battle that would cost more money I didn't have. The bills kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last, charging for things like therapeutic activities that I knew weren't happening. 5 weeks after that first APS visit, they finally released their preliminary findings, and it was everything I'd reported and more. Serious deficiencies in care standards, medication management violations, inadequate supervision, failure to maintain proper hygiene, the list went on for pages. But when it came to the stolen ring and other missing items, they said they couldn't prove who took them without video evidence or witnesses willing to testify. The investigator called it progress, said the facility would face fines and increased oversight, but it didn't feel like justice to me, not even close. 2 weeks later, the state came down hard on Serenity Gardens with threats of $10,000 fines per day until they fixed everything. I watched corporate lawyers rush into emergency meetings while Waters paced his office making frantic phone calls. They managed to negotiate something called a corrective action plan that gave them 90 days to make changes. Waters sent out an email to all families saying he was taking a leave of absence for personal reasons. Everyone knew corporate was forcing him out, but letting him save face. I met with Detective Zaire at the police station where he showed me photos of similar rings from pawn shops. He explained the ring was probably melted down within days for its gold value since that's what thieves usually do. Something feels off about how that corporate specialist tried to handle this mess with empty words about journeys and partnerships without any real plans. Makes me wonder what exactly they're trying to hide behind all that meaningless corporate talk when families are clearly suffering from their neglect. Without the actual ring as evidence and Mom unable to testify about what happened, the prosecutor wouldn't take the case. The investigation got moved to inactive status, which basically meant they gave up. I scheduled a care plan meeting and brought Alonzo as my witness, since he offered to help document everything. Linda and Sandra sat across from us in the conference room looking uncomfortable as Alonzo took notes. They couldn't hide behind vague answers anymore when I asked specific questions about Mom's medication schedule. Sandra kept checking her phone while Linda stammered through explanations about staffing shortages. Their discomfort was obvious when Alonzo asked for copies of all care logs from the past month. Small victories mattered now, even if the big ones seemed impossible. I spent weeks calling other facilities trying to find somewhere better for Mom. Most places had waiting lists or wanted deposits I couldn't afford right away. Finally, a place called Willowbrook, an hour away, had an opening because someone had just died that morning. I hated feeling grateful that another family was grieving, but Mom needed out of Serenity Gardens immediately. The facility looked cleaner and the staff actually made eye contact when I toured it. Moving day came faster than expected, and Mom didn't understand why we were packing her things. She kept asking where Dad was and if we were going home to the old house. A few of the good aides came to say goodbye and seemed genuinely sad to see her leave. One younger aide named Maria hugged Mom and whispered that she deserved better care. I thanked the good ones for their kindness while ignoring Linda and Sandra, who watched from the nurses' station. 3 days after we moved Mom. Waters officially resigned with a press release about pursuing new opportunities. Corporate spun it as bringing in fresh leadership for a new direction in resident care. The press release didn't mention the state investigation, or the fines, or anything about abuse. He probably got a big severance package while families like ours lost everything to theft and neglect. My phone buzzed with a text from Darla saying she quit Serenity Gardens and found a hospital job. She wrote that the problems went all the way up to corporate and nothing would really change. She wished us luck, but her message sounded defeated, like she'd given up on fixing anything. More staff started quitting, according to families still stuck there who messaged me on Facebook. Atticus filed our formal complaint and demand letter with corporate's legal department the next week. Within days, they offered a settlement that would cover Mom's care for a year if I signed an NDA. The money would help, but signing meant I could never talk about what happened at Serenity Gardens. It felt like blood money, paying me to shut up about them hurting Mom. I spent sleepless nights weighing Mom's need for care against my need to warn other families. Atticus helped me negotiate a different deal where I took less money but kept some freedom to speak. I accepted partial settlement for care costs, but refused the total gag order they wanted. The agreement said I couldn't post specifically naming Serenity Gardens, but I could discuss elder abuse in general. It was a compromise that felt like giving up, but Mom's new facility needed payment. I wrote a long post about elder care abuse without naming specific places and shared it everywhere online. Within hours, it had thousands of shares and hundreds of comments from people with similar stories. Support poured in, but so did trolls saying I was lying for attention or trying to get money. Reading the nasty comments made me physically sick, but I kept the post up anyway. Other families started reaching out privately saying my story gave them courage to check on their loved ones. Some found similar problems at their facilities and started their own investigations. A reporter contacted me wanting to do a story, but I had to decline because of the settlement terms. The partial gag order meant I could only speak in general terms about industry problems. I started a private support group for families dealing with elder abuse where we shared resources. Corporate sent Atticus a cease and desist letter claiming I was violating our agreement by organizing families. He wrote back that supporting other families wasn't covered by the settlement terms at all. They backed off, but I knew they were watching everything I posted online now. Mom seemed calmer at Willowbrook, though she still didn't recognize me most visits. My cousin called me that weekend to say the whole family was talking about the settlement. She said my aunt thought I was stupid for not taking the full amount they offered. My uncle texted me that I should have held out for more money. Then my brother called to say I sold out by taking any money at all. The stress of everyone having opinions about my choices made my stomach hurt. We used to have Sunday dinners together, but now nobody wanted to be in the same room. My aunt stopped inviting me to her house. My brother barely answered my texts anymore. The family group chat went quiet except for birthday messages. I visited Mom the next Tuesday, and something amazing happened. She looked right at me and smiled like she knew who I was. She reached out and touched my hand. The bruises on her arms were fading to yellow. Her hair was clean and brushed. She was wearing fresh clothes that fit her properly. The food on her tray looked normal, and she was actually eating it. She still weighed less than before, but her cheeks had some color back. When I left that day, I felt hope for the first time in months. 3 days later, the state's final report arrived in my email. They fined Serenity Gardens $50,000 instead of the $200,000 the investigator recommended. The report said the facility would keep operating with a provisional license. They had to submit monthly reports and allow surprise inspections, but they stayed open. All those families still had loved ones there. The system protected the business over the residents again. Atticus called me about the civil case that afternoon. He said we had another deposition scheduled for next week. The other side filed 3 more motions to dismiss. Each response cost me another $1,000 in legal fees. My savings account was almost empty. Atticus kept saying we had a strong case but warned me trials take years. He said the other side was trying to drain my money so I'd give up. I was tired but couldn't stop now. I started checking on Mom at Willowbrook every single day. I took photos of her meals before she ate them. I counted her pills when the nurse wasn't looking. I wrote down every bruise or mark on her body. I questioned why they gave her certain medications. The staff started avoiding me in the hallways. One nurse told another I was difficult. The director asked me to schedule a meeting about my concerns. I didn't care what they thought anymore. Trust was gone forever. But small things kept getting better for Mom. She gained 3 pounds that month. She slept through the night without the heavy drugs they used to give her. Sometimes when I visited, she would hum old songs she used to sing to me. Once she called me by my childhood nickname. Another time she asked about my dad like she remembered he existed. These tiny moments of her real self coming through kept me going when everything else felt hopeless. A woman from my support group messaged me on Facebook. Her mom had been at Serenity Gardens too. She died last week from pneumonia that went untreated for days. The family was suing, but she said it wouldn't bring her mother back. We talked on the phone for 2 hours that night. She cried about missing the signs. I told her it wasn't her fault. We made plans to meet for coffee to go through her documentation together. More families kept reaching out with similar stories. Then a thick envelope arrived from Serenity Gardens with the new director's name on it. Inside was a glossy brochure about their comprehensive transformation program. They had new photos of smiling residents and happy staff members. The letter invited families to tour the improved facility. They offered a discount for anyone who wanted to return. Not one word mentioned the investigation. Nothing about the fines or the victims. They acted like nothing bad ever happened there. I threw it in the trash but pulled it back out to keep as evidence. That night I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by boxes of documents. Medical records covered every surface. Photos of bruises and dirty rooms filled folders. Receipts for legal fees made a pile inches high. I realized this fight would never really end. Mom would always need care somewhere. I would always worry about her treatment. The system was bigger than one facility or one lawsuit. Other families would go through this same nightmare, but I kept organizing every piece of paper. I labeled every photo with dates and times. I scanned everything to backup drives. If nothing else, I would have proof of what happened. The next morning, Detective Zaire called with news about the criminal case. He said the prosecutor reviewed everything but decided not to file charges. The evidence wasn't strong enough for criminal prosecution. Nobody would face jail time for what they did. The staff members who stole from residents would keep working in healthcare. The nurses who drugged patients for convenience faced no consequences. The director who covered it all up could run another facility tomorrow. I sat there holding the phone long after he hung up. The anger I expected didn't come. I was too tired to rage anymore. The injustice burned, but I had no energy left to fight it. 3 weeks later, I was signing papers at Willowbrook Manor while Mom sat in their lobby looking confused but clean. The place wasn't fancy, but the The floors didn't smell like piss, and they actually had staff walking around instead of scrolling phones. Mom's sudden improvement at Willowbrook makes me wonder why Serenity Gardens couldn't manage basic care like clean clothes and real food if this new place can do it so easily. I checked every room before signing, counted the cameras that actually pointed at things that mattered, watched them serve lunch to make sure the food wasn't growing mold. The director showed me their medication logs with timestamps that actually made sense and staff signatures I could read. Mom got a room on the second floor with a window facing the garden where other residents sat in actual chairs instead of being parked in wheelchairs they didn't need. I visited Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, learned the staff names, brought donuts sometimes, made myself known without being annoying about it. The settlement check from Serenity came 2 months later. $40,000, that sounded like a lot until Willowbrook's bill arrived for $8,000 a month. I did the math at my kitchen table and realized we had 5 months before I'd be broke. Started applying for night jobs that same day. Got hired at a warehouse loading trucks from midnight to 8 in the morning. My back started hurting after the first week, but Mom needed somewhere safe and Willowbrook was safe even if it wasn't perfect. They forgot her afternoon snack sometimes and her sheets got changed every 3 days instead of daily, but she was eating real food and taking her actual medications. I'd drive straight from the warehouse to visit her, sometimes falling asleep in the lobby chair while she watched game shows. The other families started recognizing me, the guy who was always there checking things, and they'd ask me to peek in on their parents too. 6 months into this routine, I got a letter saying Serenity Gardens had been bought by Harmony Healthcare Solutions with a glossy brochure promising a new era of excellence. Drove by there one afternoon and saw the same cars in the employee parking lot, same nurses smoking by the dumpster, just a new sign out front. Called the state to report it, but they said new ownership meant a clean slate unless new violations occurred. Started going to these advocacy meetings downtown where families shared horror stories and legislators sent their assistants to take notes they'd never read. I stood up once and told them about Mom's stolen ring and the moldy food and the fake documentation, watched them nod politely while checking their phones. The Nursing Home Association had 3 lobbyists for every one of us, and they wore better suits. Mom was getting worse by then, forgetting my name most visits, sometimes backing away when I walked in like I was there to hurt her. The same scared look she had that first day I found her at Serenity. I'd sit in the corner until she calmed down, then slowly move closer, sometimes taking an hour just to hold her hand. Atticus called monthly with updates that basically meant no updates. Said the corporate lawyers were filing motion after motion to delay, hoping we'd run out of money or patience. Each call ended with him asking if I wanted to settle for less just to end it, but I kept saying no, even though the legal bills were eating through my savings. The warehouse job was killing my body, and I'd added weekend shifts at a grocery store to cover the gap between Mom's Social Security and Willowbrook's rising rates. Other families at Willowbrook started calling me the watchdog guy, half joking but also grateful when I'd noticed their mom's medication was off or their dad hadn't been bathed. I kept a notebook of everything, took pictures of any bruises or issues, made copies of every document. The staff knew I was watching, and maybe that made them a little more careful, or maybe I was just paranoid from Serenity, but either way I couldn't stop checking everything twice. 5 months after that desperate call to APS that started everything, I sat in Mom's room watching her sleep peacefully in a clean bed with fresh sheets and her medications actually in her system. The justice we got was a joke. Nobody went to jail. Serenity just changed its name and kept operating, but Mom was safer even if she'd never get back those months they stole from her. The ring was gone forever, along with her dignity in those dark rooms where they treated her like an inconvenience instead of a human being. Some nights after both jobs, I'd sit in my car in Willowbrook's parking lot, too tired to drive home, watching the lights in her window, and knowing that tomorrow I'd do it all again because what else was there to do but keep fighting in whatever small ways I could manage. Thanks for hanging out and wondering through all this with me. Always feels like a bit of a journey when we're asking questions together. See you next time, and subscribe for more content like this.